Toastmasters and guests. If you look at the landscape of sports today, there's one sport that basically stands above all of them in the hierarchy, and that sport is football. Not hockey, unfortunately. If you look at baseball, basketball, hockey, no matter what, the lines between them and their popularity and football is absolutely gigantic. Whether you measure in terms of money, ratings, football right now is absolutely king. But there is one dark side, one dark element to the sport of football, and that is the health and safety of the players that are involved in football. I would do kind of a test. There are some people in this room who are parents. I happen to not be one of them. But if we put ourselves in a position where all of us had a son or multiple sons, how many of you would be concerned by a show of hands if they said, hey, mom, dad, I want to play football? How many of you would be concerned by concussions and injuries that may happen to your son? Most of the hands go up in the room, and I would include myself in that category as well. This concern, to me, is exactly why the commissioner of the NFL, Roger Goodell, made the right decision when he imposed sweeping suspensions to the members of the New Orleans Saints organization for their bounties that the NFL investigated a couple of weeks ago. Now, a lot of people might be wondering, especially in a crowd like this, what exactly is a bounty? I looked it up in the dictionary today, and there's nothing that, in terms of the word bounty, there's nothing in the dictionary that exactly fits where it applies in football. But some of the language that Merriam-Webster use include rewards, premium, subsidies, a grant to encourage. Basically, it's anything that kind of incentivizes a certain type of behavior. The NFL launched a multi-year investigation from basically 2009 to 2012 on the Saints organization. And what they found was that the Saints were basically employing a cash bounty system where they pay players essentially who injure other players who are on the football field. As an example of this, to kind of put this concretely, before the NFC Championship game a couple of years ago against the Minnesota Vikings, a linebacker named Jonathan Vilma got in front of the room, in front of the defensive players, and put $10,000 into a pot. And he said, whoever knocks out the opposing quarterback in this game, Brett Favre is going to win $10,000. That's an example of what a bounty is and how it applies specifically to football. So as a result of this investigation that the NFL launched against the Saints, they imposed basically their harshest punishments they've had since the 1960s, which were basically gambling-related suspensions. Roger Goodell, who runs the NFL, he's the commissioner, gave Sean Payton, the head coach of the Saints, a year-long suspension. The former defensive coordinator who ran this bounty program got an indefinite suspension. The organization got fined. The general manager got an 8-game suspension. So essentially, pretty serious stuff. In football, we run a very fine line, because I'm sure a lot of people are asking, well, this is a sport where you're trying to hurt people, so where exactly is the line that you draw between what's inherent in the sport of football and something that kind of crosses the line? People have said bounties have happened basically at every level of football, whether that's college, whether that's high school, or even down to the Pop Warner level. But I would argue, and I argued in the speech, that bounties are exactly where this crosses the line. And those people are wrong who mention the fact that bounties exist throughout the different levels of football. And the reason is this, is context, it's environment. If you look at football and the way it's been covered the last couple of years, the New York Times did a lot of studies on concussions and talking about just the link between brain injuries and the increase of concussions in football. To give you a very tangible example, there was a guy who played football in the 1980s with the Chicago Bears, a pretty good player named Dave Dorson. In February of 2011, Dave Dorson shot himself in the chest and not the head. The reason why he committed suicide in this fashion is because he wanted scientists to basically study his brain and figure out, what exactly did his injuries in football lead to some degenerative nerve condition, or I guess the phrase is neurodegenerative disease. They found that was the case with Dave Dorson. The NFL right now is a defendant in a variety of lawsuits. The latest one has about 120 plus former players who essentially argue, similar to the big tobacco companies back 20 years ago, that the NFL didn't really tell these players about the dangers of the sport in which they play. So obviously there is the PR legal element that the NFL has to defend in this case. Football is an inherently dangerous sport. If you play defense, regardless of whether you play college or the NFL, your goal is to hurt the opposing quarterback. So where is the line? To me, a cash bounty system is the line. I think that in any sport, your goal should not be to injure the opposing players. That's when it crosses the line. When the NFL has an investigation, they show $1,500 for card-offs, which is basically you hurt somebody, card comes on the field, a player gets carded off. That to me is where things cross the line. And it's impossible to regulate this if it's at a low level. If it's between players, if it's in hushed tones, in locker rooms, that's not something that the NFL can really regulate. But when this goes from the coaching staff on down, when the NFL comes to the Saints and says, this practice must be stopped, it must be curtailed, that to me is the level where these kind of suspensions should be imposed. And I personally believe that's why Roger Goodell made the right move in imposing these sweeping suspensions, because I think the NFL cannot support a rogue system that goes on like this. When you have a system that basically incentivizes and rewards players for intentionally injuring other players on a football field, and it's not hearsay, but it's actually proven, there's no way that it can stand. And when you look at the concussions and the deaths, the suicides we've seen from former NFL players in the last 5, 10, 15 years, this is something that had to be done, and I think the NFL did the right thing. Thank you.